My name's Grace. I'm just your regular woman, but life's thrown some curveballs my way. I guess I should start from the beginning. I met Jack in high school. He was the quiet guy in class, always keeping to himself. I was the one who made the first move. "Hey Jack, got a minute?" I remember asking him one day after class. That's how it all started. We were the typical high school sweethearts. Prom night, first kiss under the stars, all that stuff. His folks, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, they loved me from day one. "Grace, you're just the kind of girl we hoped Jack would find," Mrs. Dawson used to say. I felt like part of their family. The only person who didn't seem too thrilled was my younger sister Lily. She's 4 years younger than me, but we never really got along. I remember catching her staring at Jack with this, I don't know, this longing look in her eyes. But I shrugged it off. Sisters, right? Jack and I got married when we were both 23. I had just finished college and started working as an economist. Jack took a job as a security guard. It wasn't much, but we were happy. Or so I thought. A year into our marriage, our twins, Alex and Ben, were born. Jack was over the moon at first. "We're a real family now, Grace," he said, holding them at the hospital. But that joy didn't last. He started coming home late, sometimes not at all. "Where have you been?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice steady. "Out," he'd snap back, avoiding my gaze. It was like living with a stranger. Then came the fight that changed everything. Money was tight, and the twins wouldn't stop crying. "Can't you make them stop?" Jack yelled one night. "I'm doing my best, Jack. They're your kids, too," I fired back. He stormed out of the house that night. The next morning, Jack and all his stuff were gone, vanished. I called him over and over, no answer. In a panic, I called my parents. "Have you heard from Jack?" I asked, voice trembling. There was a pause on the line. "Grace, honey, Lily's gone too," my dad finally said. My heart sank. It couldn't be. But deep down, I knew. Betrayed by my husband and my sister. I leaned on my parents and Jack's folks during that time. They were all I had left. "We're here for you, Grace," Mr. Dawson assured me, his voice heavy with disappointment. I filed for divorce. No sign of Jack or Lily. I was alone, with 2 boys to raise and a broken heart. But I was determined to keep going, for my boys. Life without Jack was like walking through a never-ending storm. Me, with my twin boys, Alex and Ben, just trying to keep our heads above water. I remember one evening, the boys were crying non-stop. I was at my wits' end. That's when Mom called. "Grace, how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "Mom, it's tough. The boys won't sleep, and I'm exhausted," I admitted, feeling the tears coming. "Listen, honey, you're not alone in this. We're here for you, okay? Don't you forget that," Mom said firmly. That was Mom, always the rock in our family. Then there was Jack's dad, Mr. Dawson. He came over one day, just to check in. "Grace, I want you to know, we're just as upset with Jack as you are. You're still family to us," he said, sitting on our worn-out couch, looking around the small apartment I could barely afford. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. Mr. Dawson always had a way of making me feel like I wasn't a total failure. But the reality was, money was tight, real tight. I remember going through the bills, feeling like I was drowning. "How am I going to do this?" I whispered to myself. My dad came by one weekend to help out. He saw the stack of bills on the kitchen table. "Grace, you know we can help you out with this, right?" he said, his brow furrowed with worry. "I know, Dad, I want to do this on my own. I have to," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I settled into a routine. It was hard, no doubt about it. But every time I looked at Alex and Ben, with their big, innocent eyes, I knew I had to keep going. They were my world now, my everything. One day, after a particularly rough night, I dropped the boys off at my parents' place for a few hours. Just needed some time to breathe, you know? I sat in the park, watching other families. Kids running around, laughing. Parents watching over them, smiles on their faces. It hit me then, how much my life had changed. How much I had lost. But then I thought about what I still had. My boys. My family. A fighting spirit. I wiped away the tears, stood up, and walked back to my parents' house. I was Grace, single mom to 2 amazing boys, and I was going to make it, come hell or high water. Life was a roller coaster, and I was hanging on, trying not to fall off. Then one day, Mr. Dawson, Jack's dad, came over with an offer that could change everything. "Grace, I've been thinking," he started, looking a bit uncomfortable in our tiny living room. "I've got some savings, around 100,000. I want to give it to you, for the boys." I was speechless for a second. "Mr. Dawson, that's a lot of money. But I can't just take it," I replied, feeling overwhelmed. He waved a hand dismissively. "It's for my grandson's future, Grace. No strings attached." His generosity was touching, but an idea was forming in my mind. "Mr. Dawson, what if we use that money to start a business? Something that can give us all a steady income?" He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of business?" "A pastry shop," I said, the idea growing in my mind. "Your wife, Anne, she's an amazing baker. Remember those cakes she used to make for the church bake sales?" Mr. Dawson chuckled. "Yeah, she always had a knack for baking, but she's been out of that game for a long time." "Well, maybe it's time for her to get back in," I suggested, feeling a spark of excitement. The next step was talking to Mrs. Dawson, Anne. I went over to their house the following day. "Anne, I have a proposal for you," I said as we sat in her cozy kitchen. "How would you feel about starting a pastry shop? You bake, I'll handle the finances, and George can manage the front end." Anne looked surprised. "Me? A pastry chef again? Oh, I don't know, Grace. It's been ages." "You still got it, Anne. I know it," I encouraged her, hoping she'd see the potential. After a bit of convincing, Anne warmed up to the idea. "Well, it has always been a dream of mine," she admitted with a smile. We worked out the details over the next few weeks, found a little spot downtown that was perfect for the shop. We all put in the work, painting, decorating, getting everything ready. Opening day was a whirlwind. I stood behind the counter, watching as people poured in, drawn by the smell of fresh pastries and Anne's reputation. "Grace, we're doing it! We're actually doing it!" Anne said, her face flushed with excitement as she took a brief break from the kitchen. I smiled, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't felt in a long time. "We sure are, Anne. We sure are." It was more than just a business. It was a new beginning, a chance to build something of my own, and I was ready for it. The pastry shop, Sweet Beginnings, was more than just a new venture. It became our world. The early mornings, the endless baking, the constant hum of the oven, it was exhausting but exhilarating. Anne was in her element in the kitchen. "Grace, I need more sugar," she'd call out, her voice muffled by the mixer's whir. I'd dash to the storeroom, lugging back a heavy bag of sugar. "Here you go, Chef Anne," I'd tease, dropping the bag with a thud. George, Mr. Dawson, was the charm behind the counter. "You must try our apple pie, best in town," he'd boast to the customers, who lapped up every word. He had a knack for making everyone feel special. The shop was bustling from dawn till dusk. People came for the pastries, but stayed for the warmth. We became a fixture in the community. Regulars would drop by, not just for a bite, but for a chat. "Grace, how do you manage all this?" One of our regulars, Mrs. Jenkins, asked me one busy afternoon. "It's a lot, but I've got a great team," I replied, gesturing towards Anne and George, who were sharing a laugh over a batch of burnt cookies. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when the dough just wouldn't rise, or when a new recipe turned into a disaster. "Back to the drawing board," Anne would say, undeterred by the setback. One day, we faced our first big crisis. The oven broke down in the middle of a huge order. "What are we going to do?" Anne panicked, her hands covered in flour. I took a deep breath. "We'll figure it out, Anne. We always do." And we did. We borrowed the bakery's oven down the street and worked through the night. The order was delivered on time, and our reputation for reliability was cemented. As months passed, Sweet Beginnings grew in popularity. We had to hire extra help. I interviewed a bunch of local kids and hired 2, a shy girl named Sarah and a lanky boy named Tom. They were green, but eager to learn. "Keep an eye on the cupcakes, Sarah. They burn easily," Anne instructed, showing her the ropes. Tom was put on cleaning duty initially, but he soon showed a keen interest in baking. "Can I try making the dough?" he asked one day, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Why not? Let's see what you've got, Tom," Anne replied, handing him the apron. My days were filled with numbers, orders, and managing the staff. I rarely got a moment to sit down. But when I did, I'd watch the life we had built. The customers enjoying their treats, the laughter from the kitchen, the sense of community. It was overwhelming at times. My parents were regular visitors. "You've turned this place around, Grace," my dad said one day, looking around proudly. "It's not just me, Dad. It's all of us," I replied, feeling a sense of team pride. As the first anniversary of Sweet Beginnings approached, we planned something special. A big sale, free samples, the works. The shop was packed, the line stretching out the door. "Can't believe it's been a year," George said, wiping his brow as he served another customer. "It feels like just yesterday we were painting these walls," Anne added, taking a rare break from the kitchen. That night, after the last customer had left and the shop was cleaned, we sat down, exhausted but happy. "To 1 year of sweet beginnings and many more to come," I toasted, raising my coffee cup. "To family," George added, his voice thick with emotion. "To dreams," Anne said, smiling. We clinked our cups, the sound echoing in the empty shop. I looked at Anne and George, not just as my in-laws, but as my partners, my supporters, my family. Life at the pastry shop was chugging along just fine. We opened several branches in neighboring towns. It was difficult, but we managed. Once again. Then one day, out of the blue, my past decided to make a comeback. I was checking the shop's social media when I saw a message request. It was from Lily, my sister. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her since she ran off with Jack. "Living the dream with your ex, sis," read the message, followed by a photo of her and Jack lounging on some exotic beach. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. "Why now?" I muttered to myself. I tried to ignore it, but she kept sending more messages, each one a slap in the face. "Look at us, Grace. This could have been you, but you were too busy playing shopkeeper," another message taunted. I was boiling inside. During my break, I called Mom. "You won't believe who's messaged me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lily?" Mom guessed, her tone weary. "What does she want now?" "Just rubbing her fancy life in my face," I replied, scrolling through Lily's messages filled with pictures of her and Jack. "Don't let her get to you, Grace. She's just trying to provoke you," Mom advised. I knew she was right, but it was hard to swallow. That evening, I talked to George about it. "Can you believe it? After all these years, she has the nerve to flaunt her life with Jack," I said, frustration evident in my voice. George shook his head. "Some people never change. Just ignore her, Grace." But ignoring her was easier said than done. Every new message from Lily was like a thorn pricking me. Pictures of fancy dinners, luxury hotels, endless bragging. It was too much. One day, I finally snapped. "What do you want, Lily? Why are you doing this?" I typed back, my fingers trembling with anger. Her reply was quick. "Just showing you what you're missing out on. It's not too late to join the fun side of life, Grace." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Join her? After everything she had done? "No thanks, I've got everything I need right here," I typed back, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She sent a laughing emoji in response. "Suit yourself. Enjoy your little bakery." I blocked her. It felt like the only way to stop her poison from seeping into my life. But even after blocking her, her words lingered in my mind. I looked around the shop, at the customers enjoying our pastries, at my team working hard, at the life I had built. Lily could keep her so-called glamorous life. I had something real, something I was proud of. But her messages left a sour taste in my mouth. It was a reminder that no matter how far you go, the past has a way of catching up with you. I just hoped it wouldn't catch up any further. The sting of betrayal from Lily's messages lingered in my mind. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. That's when George, my father-in-law, proposed a plan that seemed almost too daring. As we sat in the back of the pastry shop, I spilled the beans about Lily's messages. George listened, his face a mix of concern and anger. "Grace, we can't let them get away with this," he said, his voice firm. "We need to teach them a lesson." I was intrigued but cautious. What do you have in mind? George's eyes twinkled with mischief. A fake will. We make them think they stand to inherit something substantial. It was a bold plan, but part of me was eager for some sort of retribution. You think it will work? I asked. I'm sure of it. Greed can make people do foolish things, he replied confidently. I took a deep breath and sent Lily a carefully worded message. Heard about George's new will. Looks like you and Jack might be in for a surprise. Lily's response was swift and predictable. What kind of surprise? Tell me more. I played along, giving away just enough to keep her interested. Can't say much. You should come back if you don't want to miss out. Then came the call from Jack. His voice, once so familiar, now sounded distant and cold. Grace, what's this about a will? He asked bluntly. Hearing him after all these years, I felt a surge of emotions, but I kept my composure. You heard right. George is considering his options, I said nonchalantly. Jack's interest was piqued. And what about us? What are we getting? The blunt greed in his voice was jarring. Not a single word about our sons, his own children. It was all about what he could gain. You'll have to come back and see, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. We'll be there, he said, before abruptly ending the call. I hung up, my heart racing. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. I filled George in on the conversation. They took the bait, I said, a mix of satisfaction and nervousness in my voice. George nodded, a look of determination on his face. Let's see how far they're willing to go for greed. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake off the anxiety. What if the plan backfired? What if it made things worse? George, however, remained calm and collected. Trust the plan, Grace. We're in control, he reassured me. As the day of their return approached, the shop buzzed with rumors. Our staff, unaware of the real reason behind Lily and Jack's return, speculated wildly. Maybe they're coming back for good, Sarah, one of our employees, suggested. Tom, another employee, chimed in. Or maybe they're here to cause more trouble. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to the impending confrontation. Lily was back in town, flaunting her lavish lifestyle right in my face. Look at all I've bought, Grace. Life's been good to us, she gloated, waving her designer bag. I tried to keep my composure. Glad to hear it, Lily. She smirked. Well, of course, you wouldn't understand. You're just a simple accountant. Her words stung. She didn't know the whole truth, but I bit back my response. I'm happy with my life, Lily. That's enough for me. She scoffed. You were always so boring, Grace. No wonder Jack left you for me. Before I could reply, George, Jack's father, stepped in. That's enough, Lily. Let's talk about why you're really here. Jack, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Yeah, about the will. We're entitled to our share, right? George looked at them both, a stern expression on his face. Actually, there's something you should know about the confectionery business. Lily and Jack leaned in, eager. The confectionery and its branches in other cities, they don't belong to me, George began, his voice steady. Their eyes widened in confusion. They belong to Grace, he continued. She's the true owner. I was just listed as the leader. Lily's face turned from smug to shocked. Jack's mouth hung open, unable to process the revelation. You're rich? Jack stammered, his eyes darting between me and George. I nodded, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. Yes, I am. Lily was speechless, her earlier arrogance evaporated. And there's more, George added. I've decided to leave all my property to my grandchildren, Grace's boys. And then Lily screamed, What? You can't do this to us. We need money to pay off these damn debts. Lily, shut up, Jack tried to tell her. I laughed. Don't worry, Jack, I know everything. All your ostentatious luxury is nothing but loans, loans, and more loans. The final blow landed. Lily and Jack looked utterly defeated, their dreams of a windfall crumbling to dust. I looked at them, feeling a mix of triumph and pity. They had come back for money, only to find that their greed had led them to nothing. After Lily and Jack left the shop, their faces a picture of shock and defeat, I couldn't help but feel a mix of triumph and relief. George patted my back. You handled that well, Grace. I just wish it didn't have to come to this, I sighed, staring at the door they had just walked out of. Well, sometimes life throws you lemons, and you made the best lemonade out of it, George said with a chuckle. Just then, Sarah, one of our employees, came up to us. Is everything okay, Grace? We heard some commotion. I smiled at her. Everything's fine, Sarah. Just some old business finally getting settled. She nodded, still looking a bit concerned, but went back to her work. The rest of the day went by in a blur. I was busy with the shop, but my mind kept going back to the encounter with Lily and Jack. It was over, finally. That evening, as I was closing up, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lily. You haven't seen the last of us, it read. I stared at the screen, feeling a surge of anger. But then, I took a deep breath and typed back. Move on, Lily, I have. I blocked her number, feeling a sense of finality. It was time to let go of the past and focus on the future. As I walked home, I thought about my journey. From the heartbreak and betrayal to building a successful business and standing up for myself. It hadn't been easy, but I had come out stronger. I reached home to find my boys, Alex and Ben, playing in the living room. They ran up to me, their faces beaming. Mommy, you're home! I hugged them tightly, feeling an overwhelming sense of love and protection for them. Yes, and I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. That night, as I tucked them into bed, I realized that this was my true wealth, my children, my family, my resilience. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face. I had faced my biggest fears and emerged victorious. I was no longer just Grace, the betrayed wife, or Grace, the simple accountant. I was Grace, the fighter, the survivor, the winner. And this was just the beginning.